Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And Cam, have you recovered from your big weekend at EAPK in Moore's Head, Kentucky?
Yeah, just barely. So it was it was a fun time, but it certainly was somewhat draining, and I think it's just the social interaction of talking to people you haven't seen in a while, and talking to new people even, and certainly was a fun time. And I think today we're gonna kind of recap what we experienced, learned, and maybe drum up some interest for individuals to attend next year. Not that they need any additional advertising because it was very well attended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a blast, but oh, I was so tired.
Were you, were you? Yeah, we were kind of burning the midnight oil there for a couple nights back to back to back. So I'm not surprised by that. And the
Well, you,
nice thing for us, we only had a 3 hour drive down from your main stopping point there in Ohio,
yeah,
and from where the sheep are there for myself. But I know a couple of individuals. It was just shocking to me how far some people showed up.
I know.
Kind of the outer reaches of what that membership list looks like. But it was awesome to see people again in person and have conversation with them.
Yeah, that I heard a couple people 10-hour drives, 12-hour drives. I think there was one 14-hour drive.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if we had any Florida. I know there's some Georgias. I know probably as far west as Missouri, some Texas
Yep,
individuals, which is pretty cool.
yep.
Um,
Wisconsin.
New Jersey.
Yep.
Yep.
All over the
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. It was neat. So in terms of sessions, what did you sit through, or maybe what was your biggest takeaway or session that you appreciated the most?
I really enjoyed the necropsy one. I guess personally, maybe I was a little disappointed in it because I guess I kind of thought that the vet that put it on would look and say, "Yep, right there, that's what the problem was on this lamb," and I can tell you exactly what it was. Where his a point, I guess, was you can tell there's something going on here in this area. Now, what you need to do is seal that up and send it off to a lab to have it tested. And
Mm,
after he said it, made perfect sense to me. But I guess ahead of time, being naive about that kind of thing, I just thought, oh, he'll point right to that and say, well, this is what it is, and then this is what you need to vaccinate for, or this is how you would have treated it. But no, it was no, you that's the section of the animal that's wrong, whether it be the heart, the liver, the
take
intestines,
your
something to that
sample.
effect. Yeah, that's the part you need to send in for a sample, and then you'll get your results back, and you'll have a better idea from there. And and so that was enlightening and disappointing all at the same time for me
Right.
because I had no idea.
Yeah, unfortunately, that stuff tends to be a little more specialized than what we might want to give credit for. But it is
Yeah.
at least, knowing there's benefit in knowing what is it normally supposed to look like, and then what are the signs that we look for to see when it's different. So we know
Yeah.
to take that sample and send it off. And that's outside of determining stillborns or died after birth,
Mhm.
seeing if lungs are floating.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot that's definitive after that part, or to see
Mhm.
this animal's got uh, an issue or didn't develop fully. I heard you guys had a cyclops lamb, which is always kind of fun to look at something a little bit different. I don't know if that
That
was
was
in your session.
Yeah, it was more than a little bit different. It was very different.
Right. Right. You wouldn't have been able to pick it up and put it in the freezer, is what you're saying. It was
Oh, I could have picked it up and put it in the freezer. It
okay.
wouldn't have bothered me, but it was just I just never seen anything like that. It
Yeah.
was just one eye, and then about where the jaws would have been was where the ears came out. I don't think there was a mouth on it at all. But yeah, it was a crazy deformity for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah. I was excited for the necropsy portion as well. And then got talking about solar grazing with some other individuals and missed it. So
Yeah, oh
I
yeah,
sat through the first session that Dr. Weaver gave on record keeping, and then uh, talked with a couple of people then for like the next hour and 20 minutes, right up until and through lunch.
yeah.
And it's which is the benefit of it, but um, just a lot of conversation about a lot of different things, and that's the benefit of having these in-person symposiums. That's why you pay the entry fee or the fee at the door and enjoy it. But anything else that kind of stuck out to you that you enjoyed?
Well, just the overall conversation, like you had said, is you just get to see people that you haven't seen for a long time, which is part of why we were burning the midnight oil, because you just want
Right.
to get around and talk to everybody. And it was kind of neat to have people come up and say, "Hey, you must be Big Tom Perkins. I recognize your voice from the podcast." I thought that was kind of cool, and you always make some new friends. When you go to this kind of thing, I enjoyed the I guess the presentation on the parasite resistance and how it just doesn't apply to just parasites. I
Yeah,
thought
and
that was just amazing.
that was one of the big takeaways. I was looking at the paper that Dr. Bowditch used for that discussion, and
Hmm.
certainly, trained by an immunologist, you tend to look at other species that have taken a deeper look at immunology. And so, for example, the paper he used was a poultry paper, and he had described kind of the mouse work that they had done with some gastrointestinal nematodes in that mouse species, and what he had done in some of his graduate work. But that stuff all applies, and it all comes back, and we have to look at those species and try to make ties and similarities, species to species. But the poultry thing I think is fascinating because if you think we're selecting for growth or feed efficiency in the sheep realm, that's all that matters in the poultry realm. And so the
Hmm.
fact that, well, and on top of that, death loss.
Yeah.
So, they looked at two different divergently selected lines of high immunity level birds and also high growth birds. And the high growth birds, those lines that were selected did not have selection for immunity, and death loss was significant.
Hmm.
And then when we're selecting in that situation, when they were selecting for improved immune function, it was a mixed bag. So they had birds that would also not grow, and then there was also birds that were exceptional for growth. And just saying, like, as a reminder to sheep producers that are selecting for parasite resistance and improved immunity or immune function, we can select for improved immunity and still select for growth without inhibiting those economically relevant traits. And so and that was kind of the same thought, my presentation on feed efficiency. We're looking at some divergently selected, some extreme rams on both ends of the spectrum, and fecal egg count EBV does not impact feed efficiency whatsoever. We've got high fecal egg count sheep that are producing low uh, RFI lambs, so more feed efficient, and we have low fecal egg count sheep that are producing more feed efficient offspring. So it's exciting. It's one of those things. Every additional project, up until this point, has kind of shown the positives of selecting, and there's not a whole lot of negative that comes along with it, which I think has kind of debunked some of the thought process or assumed kind of situations in those selections. So kind of a don't die, don't grow, or don't die, don't perform mentality of
Hmm.
parasite resistance and selecting individuals for that. Um, so that's certainly exciting. I think we can make some real strides with our breeding objectives in coming years and push the envelope in that field.
Yeah, I thought just that whole thing was amazing.
Yeah.
There was so much information there. I'm
Oh yeah.
kind of hoping that somebody recorded it and ends up putting it up because I like to listen to it 2 or 3 times to
Oh,
get
you
all
pulled
that.
something different out every single time.
Yeah, to get that info. It was just it was phenomenal. Um,
Yeah.
and Dr. Andrew Weaver gave a really good presentation
Yeah,
too.
so I listened to his first one, which was I thought so this is an issue on my own part. I thought he was giving the same presentation twice to switch
Yeah.
back and forth between the necropsy because those sessions were held at the same time. So I sat through the first one, which was record keeping, and we've talked about it, and um, not that I cannot improve on it, but a lot of the stuff was more geared towards beginning producers, and it was great, and the room was packed. And certainly, there's some things talked a lot about the Shearwell system and utilizing EIDs and kind of the potential and future for electronic tags that I think we're going to see coming down the line here pretty soon with our disease tracing stuff. And then
Mhm.
he actually walked through Pedigree Master and kind of talked about that, which I don't think we don't do enough of just kind of the walkthrough stuff. There's resources out there certainly, but it was more geared towards producers that were maybe looking at joining NSIP, and as well as NSIP producers that needed a refresher on a lot of things. So
Mhm.
uh, beneficial. And then your session, the second session that you sat through that he presented, what'd you think about that?
It was good. It was mostly on, if I remember correctly, it was mostly on GEBVs and how to use
What's,
those.
what's that stand for, Tom?
Genetic estimated breeding values.
Genomically enhanced.
There it is.
Yeah.
See,
Yep.
I mess that
Uh,
up every time. That's why you asked me.
I know. Well, and for those that are listening that maybe don't know what GBVs are, and
Yeah.
certainly if you have some ties to the cattle industry, something they've been doing for a little while now that is certainly a way to improve some accuracies on some younger seed stock. Uh, it's one of those buzzwords that we've thrown around, especially in the Katahdin realm, but the sheep realm for a while now, and I think we're starting to grasp the potential for it. I think early on it was mostly just excitement, like, oh,
Mhm.
we've got these, and now it's like, okay, so now what do we do with them, or
Mhm.
or how do we use them as efficiently and as beneficially as possible?
Yeah. Well, one of the big things with that genomic testing is it just increases the accuracy of those breeding values. And usually you're looking at generations to kind of prove that out. And that with that genomic testing, that they're looking right at the DNA. They know what those markers are.
Right.
So
Yeah,
if
and
you're
I
in
think
the
they're gonna.
beginning stages and you haven't been putting a lot of information in NSIP, I mean, now that information and you do some genomic testing, then your information is a whole lot more accurate, and it
Right.
shows up in those numbers in the NSIP.
Yeah, certainly on some younger stock, those ram lambs that maybe we'd like to use, but
Mhm.
we're not sure what their EBVs are going to do a couple years down the road, and to save us some of that generation interval timing, the GBVs I think have a lot of potential to do that. And since we're talking about symposiums, I did hear Lynn Farmeyer's giving a GBV talk or discussion at KHSI Expo there in Ohio here in about a month.
Mhm.
So it should be a good kind of conversation. Maybe we could look at having an episode on here about them, kind of further explain what they are for the sheep side of things, as well as what they're doing in the cattle side of the industry as well.
Yep, I'm all signed up. Got my hotel room. I'm all ready to go. That should definitely be a good event.
So, any of the other sessions, did you sit through Dr. Ron Lewis's session?
I did. Admittedly, I was pretty tired by the time that came.
Yeah, it was a long day of sitting in the classroom
I
of
kind of
discussion.
so you'd probably be better off to explain that because I was doing a little dozing off here and there.
Yeah, so I think it wasn't specific to the GEMS project. The whole discussion was not. The parts there at the end, I think, were, and something that I've kind of failed or haven't taken the time to grasp really what they're trying to look at and improve on. And my biggest concern is early on when you're trying to evaluate animal production or performance related to phenotypic performance. What are we actually measuring? And then the environmental impact into that. And I probably ought to put the disclaimer on there that I'm not a quantitative geneticist. And so going into it, that is a daunting task.
Hmm.
When we're trying to measure environment and look at these different items that go into our EBV evaluation or calculations and selection, that is a big thing to kind of take on in my mind. And so, you're part of that GEMS project, looking at genetics and environment and how we're managing that system. But there's a lot of data that's collected that has a degree of usefulness for science, and then also a timer late a time yeah Tabor a time and labor standpoint
Hmm.
of, are there items that I could be doing that are more worthwhile for my time?
Yeah.
What I'm putting into evaluating body condition score, evaluating weights. Um, and what was intriguing and what I think really convinced me is we were discussing, or he was discussing in his presentation. He's like, if I can do one thing, I can get producers to weigh sheep more often
Hmm.
on the mature ewe size. And we've started pulling some weights on our ewes pre-breeding so that we can kind of evaluate for us that pre-breeding weight, and talking with some other producers, that pre-breeding weight is what we're assuming to be the most accurate mature body size for those ewes.
Hmm.
So they're not carrying lambs. So
Right.
our it's not skewed in that sense. They haven't just weaned lambs. So our data is not skewed in that sense.
Hmm.
And if I'm already sorting ewes to go into different breeding groups or for pre-breeding vaccines, it lines up with a labor kind of time point that it doesn't add that much to what we're already doing. We're already handling those sheep to give that vaccine, to sort them into breeding groups, whatever it is. We have hands on them, we have eyes on them, so we can evaluate kind of weights at that time point. His description of taking weights, looking at pre-lambing, body condition score, weights in that sense, post-lambing, looking at body condition score and weights at that time point. And, I think body condition score is important. For me, a lot of it's subjective, and maybe we don't want to call those ewes, a 1.5, 2,
Hmm.
when really, we'll call them a 3 because we feel bad because it's a tie directly back to our management.
Yeah.
Uh, but if we can go in with an unbiased kind of sense, knowing that this is the most beneficial thing for the flock, this data we're collecting, and his description on just evaluating, ewes going into the lambing jug and ewes coming out of lactation, just look at body condition scores.
Hmm.
And it sounds too simple. If they're all managed in the same production system, similar environment or the same inputs across the board, which ones handle it better?
Yeah.
Which ones are coming out skinny? And then we look at their litter weight, look
Hmm.
at how many pounds of lamb they wean, which
Hmm.
ones are coming out fat, and looking at the number of pounds of lamb that they've weaned.
Yeah.
And if we have a fat ewe, and I think Dr. Weaver made this point, if you have a fat ewe that weaned a 30-pound lamb single, she's doing her job.
Yeah.
And likewise, if we have one that's a body condition score 1, 2, and she's only weaning, say, 100 pounds of lamb versus one that's a body condition score 3-4 and weaning 100 pounds of lamb,
Mm-hmm.
which ones are more adapted to the environment we're asking for them to produce in?
Yep.
And so it's as simple as those two kind of data collection methods are. It can tell you a lot. And I don't know that I've heard somebody get that excited about body condition scoring in a while, but after you kind of talked about it, it's like, man, I need to start taking a serious look at that, because this whole time you've heard about it, it's like, there's not a lot of difference in our youth flock talking producers that are in that program. And I understand there's some teat scoring items
Mm-hmm.
in that data collection, and to that extent, I understand why, and looking at rates of mastitis and certainly some other things. But yeah, I think we're going to start pulling more weights and pulling more body condition scores, because it was the first time I had heard something. It's like, I can justify the effort going into it for
Yep.
those type of data points.
The time
Um,
and labor, which you now call Tabor.
Tabor, yes, yep,
Tabor, the new
that's the
term.
new
You
the
heard it
new
first
term.
here on the Grazing
Um,
Sheep podcast.
right,
Tabor.
right, yeah. So I really enjoyed that discussion. I thought he did a wonderful job presenting that data and kind of the percentage of impact that environment has had on performance in
Mhm.
sheep and flocks that have some of those genetic ties. So uh, certainly there's some cool things occurring in the sheep industry, and it's neat to be a part of it and just to see it kind of front and center with the breed that we're choosing to raise. And there's a lot of things going on outside of that breed as well. So yeah, it was great. It was a great time. I thought, it, like you said, uh, it was a long day,
Mhm.
but in kind of discussing with a couple of the presenters the day before, like, is this too deep? And specifically, Dr. Bowder, she's like, the immunology stuff, I can talk about it, but I do not want to put people to sleep. I was like,
Mhm.
hey, people are coming here to be challenged.
Yep.
And, you saw he's a phenomenal presenter. Uh,
Mhm.
so you're going to stay awake whether you want to or not,
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
gather something from it. So, people were coming to be challenged.
And
Breeders,
people ask good questions at the end.
oh yeah, breeders, consigners, everybody, they showed up, made the trip to Moorhead, Kentucky, with an expectation of high level small ruminant education. And I feel like EAPK delivered on that note. Um,
Absolutely.
and it was, I, I said it before we went, and I'll confirm it after, in terms of the level of information delivered. I don't know if I've been present in a room where, or been a part of an educational event that has delivered that level of information and education to consigners, producers, new new producers, experienced producers, um, and I hope people walked away with as much information and beneficial uh, tools as I did. So
Mhm.
it was great.
So what did you think of the sale and the sheep that were present for the sale?
Yeah, I think they only had two consigners that didn't bring sheep down, if I'm remembering correctly, which is shocking, because honestly, if I lived in Texas, you would have I would have had to have taken better pictures,
Yeah.
the sheep, because I wasn't going to make the drive. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's appreciated as a buyer.
Oh yeah.
Certainly appreciated those individuals showing up. Um, and I thought, top to bottom, a really stout group of production oriented sheep.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and everybody looked good. There was, you could tell consigners had put some effort into to presenting those sheep.
Mhm.
I know I caught some flack because brought a curry comb with me in case something, in a brush, in case something got too dirty, and got you know ragged on a little bit. Like, oh, you can't. take the kid out of the show barn, but
Yeah.
you take the show barn out of the kid. It's like, oh my goodness. So I think next year, to kind of put the money where the mouth is, just start fitting the things,
Yeah.
blow them out, fit them up like some show cattle, and then we'll see if people start talking. But no, it was a great time and just kind of discussing with people, uh, what their production systems look like, what they're trying to pursue long term. There were certainly some high powered EBV sheep that
Oh
made
yeah.
the trip.
Yeah.
And it's always fun to see those sheep in person because you've seen them on paper,
Hmm.
and that's only part of the equation.
Yeah.
I don't think we pay attention enough to some of the structural and uh, just phenotypic evaluations that some of that stockmanship can be lost when we start to get into that higher level selection or paper selection methods. So
Hmm. Yeah, I thought the sheep all looked fantastic.
yeah, and
They're
the facility much better than I had
all
assumed. I didn't
yeah, the
didn't
facility was
have any
fantastic. The
I didn't
pens
have
that
any
they
previous thoughts, but
yeah, the pens they had there for the sheep were just amazing. They were nice straight look rows. They had the rows separated a good bit. I think their thought was just for biosecurity,
right.
try to separate those out. Consigner lots, they had those just the way they were set up. They had those all separated. And I thought Morehead State did a fantastic job.
Yeah, they certainly need a pat on the back for that one because I think there was a lot of work that went into it. Uh,
Hmm.
behind the scenes, and it certainly was appreciated from a consigner standpoint and from a presenter standpoint, a buyer standpoint, just an attendee. They did a phenomenal job, had a great facility there, and uh, they even presented some phenomenal breeding animals, and I think walked
Hmm.
away with some phenomenal breeding animals as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, it was a great time, and again, information was not lacking in
No.
the in the educational events, and that's kind of the goal, was to share some of what we heard and the highlights uh, of what was presented. So
So my other favorite part, I guess, of the entire thing was Margaret Buck's cupcakes.
oh my, yep,
I would probably make that trip again just for Margaret Buck's cupcakes.
yeah,
They
yeah.
were
Shameless plug.
phenomenal.
If
Yeah.
you want to
So
go look at some
Margaret,
sheep, yeah, yeah,
yeah, make
yeah,
it to Western Pennsylvania.
might
Bring
have to
me
be
some
the official
cupcakes.
cupcake sponsor of the Grazing Sheep podcast
Yeah,
because
I'm telling you.
they were phenomenal. Yep, they were phenomenal.
I've
So
never even
and
seen
that's the
cupcakes like that before,
I
let alone eat one
and
or
that's the
or
value
six.
again, going back to uh it never met Margaret and it sat down, ate lunch with both her and her husband. Seen her
Hmm.
a lot of times on Zoom for a lot of these calls, and
Yeah.
just to talk with these people that again we have a virtual interaction with pretty frequently, but to sit down and talk to them about what they're doing with their flock, where they see it going, it just gets you excited. There's a lot of big things happening, big picture, and then also individual producers that are growing and really uh, pushing themselves in their sheep production. So yeah, you're right. The cupcakes were phenomenal. I was cracking up the couple days before. It was she had posted a picture of them, and you had mentioned, well, I'll swing through on the way to Ohio, and I'll make sure they get down there safely. It's like, Margaret, for the sake of everybody else, do not let Tom leave with the cupcakes because I don't know if we'll have any come symposium time. So
They'd have found me sitting along the road in a sugar coma, I would think.
right, right, right. If I'm gonna go, take me that way.
Yeah.
So
So, well, we're running up on our time here, Cam. Um, you got kind of closing arguments for reasons to attend EAPK events?
yeah, I think not just EAPK events, but education in general.
Yeah.
Again, I've not that I've done this for 100 years, but I'm actively involved in producer education with the position that I've had for the last couple of years, and then through grad school.
Hmm.
Uh, I cannot stress enough the amount of learning that can occur. I don't care what type of sheep or what class of producer you would consider yourself, seed stock, commercial, feeder, buyer, whatever. Uh, take the time to go out, whether it's through your extension program or an organization like EAPK, get involved and just get involved with the conversation. You don't have to say a word, but sit there, listen, eavesdrop on somebody else's conversation. You'll pick something up. I
Hmm.
don't really care. Uh, just go, and try to be a lifelong learner. That's not the easiest thing to do, and there's time and expense associated with it. I'd argue the benefit coming out on the backside of it is going to be immense. And so, you might even make some friends along the way. So
Absolutely.
I can't stress those type events enough. I think they're a great use of time and resources, and I hope we can have some more here in the future.
Hmm. Well, it's been good catching up with you, Cam. Like always, if you want to reach out to us, you got any questions you like answered, or you want one of us to come speak at one of your events, anything to that nature, you can reach out to me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. So it's been good catching up with you, Cam, and
You too, Tom.
we'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.